Hello, this is Robert Rickover at Body Learning, and today my guest is Mustena Nazarian, an Alexander Technique teacher in Melbourne, Australia. And we're going to talk today about some parallels that Mustena has noticed between the basic ideas in Alexander's book, The Use of the Self, which is his shortest and I think generally agreed his most accessible book, and two other books, one Zen and the Art of Archery by Eugene Herrickle, I believe, which is kind of a classic book about, I'm not sure what it's about, spiritual development or who knows, but it certainly has strong connections with Alexander ideas. And a second book, which I'm not familiar with, called You're Not Your Brain by Jeffrey, what's his last name? Schatz?
Jeffrey Schwartz.
Shorts,
Yes.
Jeffrey Shorts. So, Nazana, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Robert. Thanks for having me.
So, use of the self is like an Alexander. It's like part of the Alexander Bible, really, isn't it? I
Hmm.
mean, it's a book that I would think pretty much anyone who's teaching the technique has read at
Hmm.
least once, and hopefully most serious students have read as well.
Hmm.
Um, and you have noticed these parallels with these two other books. The Zen book, Zen and the Art of Archery, is very well known. I'm not
Hmm.
so sure. I don't really know about the other one. So, what got you started in looking for parallels, or did parallels just kind of jump out at you?
Well, a bit of both. First
Hmm.
of all, I'm dealing with my own personal journey. I'm sure everyone else learning the Alexander technique, or specifically learning to teach the Alexander technique, is also dealing with their own journey. It's mind, it's body, it's spirit, it's our past experiences. What unifies these three books for me is that they're all three are dealing with learning and teaching as well, learning how to teach. And for me, the idea of giving and receiving and sensing and reacting are kind of like kaleidoscope over the teaching and learning. So in a sense, we're uh, giving, learning, and receiving teaching while sensing and reacting. I know
Hmm.
that's maybe a big concept, but when you're inside the experience, that's a definition or an observation of what's actually happening.
Hmm.
So let's say I'm in a training school, uh, come in for 16 hours a week. I'm committed to 3 years. This is one of the training models anyway.
Hmm.
And just that the whole process is centered around how I'm sensing and how I'm reacting. How am I sensing my lessons? How am I sensing how I'm being observed? Is it based on judgments to previous experience, or is it actually based on what's happening here and now?
Hmm.
So to uncover that a little bit more, judgments of myself, judgments of how I'm being perceived, I think the book You Are Not Your Brain, the four-step solution for changing bad habits, ending unhealthy thinking, and taking control of your life grabbed my attention.
It sounds
And
very Alexandrian, doesn't it?
it's fantastic.
Yeah.
And it unlike I'm not saying unlike Alexander technique, but unlike what Alexander writes about Alexander technique. He didn't want to delve into people's past. And as a teacher of the Alexander technique, I don't necessarily do that. But as we know, as teachers and also as students, especially for me in the training school um, process, um, other stuff comes up,
Sure.
whatever that stuff is. And this book, You're Not Your Brain, has it outlines a mind-body process that is very useful for learning how to deal with myself as a teacher and a learner. So it talks about the development of personality. It doesn't necessarily take a Freudian view. It's more based on the research that the writers have done. Firstly, starting with working with people who suffer from obsessive compulsive disorder, but
Mm-hmm.
they're expanding it to how it can be used for people who are checking their email all the time,
Mm-hmm.
or other habits, alcoholism, or any kind of addictive behavior that the person wants to get rid of, either working within a group, using other professionals. What I believe is that Alexander technique is a fantastic modality when people are involved in a process of looking at how they got there.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
And
Could you give an example from that book that would resonate particularly with use of the process Alexander describes in use of the self?
yeah, it's fantastic. He actually says there's this chapter where he's talking about where desire was, effort and expectations will be. So he's defining desire as the experience of wanting to avoid something unpleasant or wanting to achieve a pleasant result. And in a way, he's saying that can be your worst enemy. So I think maybe for Alexander, his desire to project to the end of the room, or his desire to want to be successful, and he was getting successful at his art, was actually became his worst enemy.
And gaining.
Yeah, thank you.
No
So,
problem.
yeah, so that's why I've got three words that I like to that I have been reiterating for myself that Alexander uses from his language. So end gaining is one of them.
Hmm.
So end gaining, I suppose, can be defined as responding in a from a fight and flight state. So
Or just wanting to get the thing you want
yeah,
without
sure.
considering the process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, uh, at some point, it might be useful for the person to realize, to really break it down and say, why do I end gain more when faced with this kind of stimulus? Or this,
As opposed to some other kind of stimulus.
yeah, and does that go back to something even really, or how I perceive a childhood event? I'm not talking about that everyone out there has had a traumatic childhood. That's not the point. Um, it's going back and just uncovering, doing a little bit of archaeology about how we perceive ourselves and
Hmm.
how that can create a end gaining response. So if I just think, well, my teacher just showed me that I end gain when I, do this thing to my body, or my body mind as I'm getting out of the chair, and I should really stop that.
Hmm.
There's probably another level to it. So rather than making my perceived end gaining, another judgment, another thing, oh, I didn't get it right again.
Hmm.
Saying, well, let me see if I can just um, not try to get it right and see if I can find another plan for uncovering why is it that I end gain?
Hmm.
What is it that takes me out of this particular moment? For me,
Hmm.
there are some specific childhood experiences,
Hmm.
and it's about learning to learn from them.
Hmm.
I can either be a victim to those childhood experiences or learn to learn from them. So Alexander's uh, experience has showed me some tools for that, but also what's expressed in the Zen in the Art of Archery, a book about learning, and also what's expressed in this book, You Are Not Your Brain, help with that, help supplement it. Um,
So you use the term archaeology to go back and look at perhaps your early life to see where something originated, right?
yep,
And and I think you also drew a very clear distinction between what I guess I would call judgment versus discernment.
sure.
Um, so you may go back and realize, oh, my parents were hypercritical about, or say I had to get all A's in school or there'd be big trouble. And so now, as an adult, anything less than perfection, I have weird reactions to. that kind of
Hmm.
thing. And so just knowing that maybe it came from a childhood situation could be helpful, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it is the
Yeah,
kind of thing that this book deals with, and
right,
it provides it provides the learner with an alternative, which very much
right,
like
right,
learning learning to direct and inhibit,
right.
learn inhibit and direct.
Now, I think some Alexander teachers might say, well, that's all very nice, but if you're in the moment and you're tuned into physical uh, tensions that
Mm.
you previously inadvertently created around particular situations, that the Alexander technique will give you some tools for basically saying no to those
Mm.
tensions.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think there are some teachers that would say, and that's really um, not only is that all you need, but actually you're better off dealing with the issue on that basis. Why go digging around in the past? So,
Yes.
what would you say to that?
Well, I think I agree with that to a certain extent. Again, we started this conversation talking about my personal view,
Mm-hmm.
and that's definitely what this book on neuroplasticity, "You Are Not Your Brain," is offering
Mm-hmm.
um, as a skill building way to be more effective as a person.
Mm-hmm.
What it means by "you're not your brain" is talking about the wiring and the patterning, sort of like the biology that's wired in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So it says you're not your brain. So if your brain is giving you what they call uh-oh messages when you're faced with a situation that actually doesn't in reality have any danger in it,
Right.
it's your brain going on that pattern because of that's one of its wirings. So to learn how to unwire it, they actually talk about an an affirmative no. They definitely talk about that affirmative no. And I think what this book can learn and their process can learn and be supplemented by the Alexander technique, by the process of giving directions to the primary control, freeing the neck.
Mm-hmm. But you,
So
but
I would like
yeah,
to do an interview with these writers about
right.
the
But
Alexander technique as well, but that's another story.
then what is the argument for it might be a good idea to at least briefly revisit the past just to kind of see where we could call it dysfunctional parenting may
Yep.
have created a problem for you or a habit in you that you want to change. Why even do that if you can just go directly to the wiring, so to speak?
Look, it's a matter of personal choice,
But
I
do
think.
you think it's useful to go back
I,
sometimes?
I think it is useful, and the person has to choose to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think no one can make anyone walk into a rehab clinic. It
Right.
doesn't work that way. So the person, um, if they're dealing with certain issues that are making them chronically anxious, for example,
Mm-hmm.
it might be useful for them to say, wait a minute, it's actually even not what my parents did. It was my perception that was formed at that time.
Right.
So they're taking responsibility. Now, if Alexander technique is not about being self-responsible, I don't know
Nothing
what it's
is.
about.
Nothing is. Yeah. So
It,
if I is what you're saying that it might be useful to go back as an archaeologist, kind of a discerner of the situation, not someone making judgments about it, in order to then make it a little easier for you to make changes in the present moment, changes to how you react to situations in the present moment.
yeah, there's a quickly. I'm just going to mention some of the language they talk about. They call these messages that, let's say, give you a sweaty palms or uh, butterflies in your stomach as you're maybe approaching a difficult situation, like a job interview.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, they call these deceptive brain messages. And so they have this 4-step program for learning how to just letting them be what they are. So it's to first one is to learn to relabel them. So relabel them as what they are. They're not you creating it. It's just part of your brain wiring, and you can undo it
Mm-hmm.
through mindfulness, which is in effect the Alexander process is being in
Right.
the moment.
Right.
Um, so it's learning to relabel what your brain is telling you as just what it is. Because if you don't, then you might be in a situation where you're trying to get it right and you're trying to override that, and it's just not working.
You're
Uh,
going to end up fighting it.
well, exactly. There actually been research done that um, people who don't, but people who suppress their emotional reaction, actually they get an increase in their blood pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And this is really interesting. They actually create an increase in the blood pressure of the people around them.
Well, I don't find that so surprising in a way.
No, it's not, but apparently they've
Yeah.
done some sort of
Yeah.
sociological, psychological research with subjects.
Right.
Um, so it increases their stress hormones. It basically, they're saying that being able to just notice what's happening
Mm-hmm.
and just let it be what it is
Mm-hmm.
much more useful and beneficial.
So maybe the answer to the question I posed earlier is that it may be useful to go back to 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 do a investigation of what happened earlier, but you don't want to hang out there for weeks and years and decades.
No, that's not what they're suggesting
Yeah,
at
no,
all.
I know that's not what you're suggesting, but that you want to, if you do go back, it's for a purpose, which is to
Exactly.
gather data that can
Yep.
be useful to you right now.
Yep.
And you're not going to go around, bad mouthing your mom for the next 30 years.
No, no. It
There's
had
no.
nothing to do with the mom anyway. It just
It
had to do
really
with that.
doesn't have. In a
No,
sense, it has nothing to do with mom,
no.
right? Yeah. So that's an interesting approach, and Alexander, when he was up against his voice issues, he didn't do a lot of dwelling on the past. It seems just from reading his books, but
Mm.
there's one point where one of his habits that isn't talked about a lot so much anymore. It wasn't just that he tightened his neck, but he
His feet.
he attempted to grab the floor with his feet,
That's right. And he
and,
blames his
and
past teacher.
I don't know that he blamed. He said that it may be something I picked up from this guy,
Mm.
who had this idea, but he didn't then go on a rant about the teacher. He just said, well, that's a habit I got from something he may have said,
Mm.
and that's interesting. But now I'm in the moment and I don't want to do it anymore because um, it's just creating extra tension in my body. Plus,
Yep.
really, the floor doesn't need to be grabbed. It's just fine without me grabbing it. I
Well,
mean,
that
yeah.
that reminds me of how Eugene Herrigel defines one of the important steps that he needed to take, and that step wasn't, it couldn't exist on its own. It had to be in response or in a positive opposition,
Mm-hmm.
useful opposition
Mm-hmm.
against another step. So the
Mm-hmm.
first one is that he had to let go. So I think that's how you define maybe inhibition. It's like Alexander didn't want to, go into this world of what the teacher shouldn't have done that, and gosh, they should have let me know about this. So he had to inhibit his response to wanting to hang on to that, which created a response where he was able to let go of hanging on to the floor.
Mm-hmm.
So both the same thing.
Right.
So for the person learning to learn archery, he had actually had to let go of wanting to hit the target. He had to let go of being wrong and letting that awful wobbling that wasn't supposed to happen. He had to let go at the same time that he projected. So,
Right. There's a moment in that book, as I remember, where he's studying archery with his, I guess it's a Zen master, right? In Japan. It's a German guy in Japan studying archery from a Zen master, and he's away from the master for a while, and he discovers a way of kind of manipulating the system. Do you
no,
remember that? He
you,
he
no.
figures out how to get the arrow right on the target, right in the center of the target by sort of direct action.
Hmm.
And he's very proud, and he shows it to the Zen master, who promptly says, "You're no longer my student. Get out of here." And he had to beg him to come back because he was I imagine because he was sort of missing the point of the whole thing. It wasn't really about becoming an archer. It
Yep.
was about becoming someone who could. Well, what was it about, Nastan? You know, it's a book
It was
it's a.
about I think it can only be expressed through my sensory awareness.
Mhm.
So it's about learning how to be out of balance,
Yeah.
learning how to get it wrong. My teacher on Australia Day, it's a hot day. I suppose what you might want to call my Zen master.
Uh huh.
He's just Dave. He's just David Brown. He's
Uh
from
huh.
Tasmania.
Yeah.
He does, he's just been doing shakuhachi, making shakuhachi, playing shakuhachi, doing Aikido since he was a teenager. And um, the live sword showed up. So it was my first experience with seeing him teach Aikido with a deadly weapon.
Uh huh.
And so he's one of his long-term student and another, I think it was another high-ranking person in the class would use the real sword when after the demonstration. And and hear him shouting from the other side of the room, "Don't look at the sword when you put it in its case. Don't look at it.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's a deadly weapon." And your first response is like, "Oh my God, I gotta hold it by the handle and put it in this case that's next to that's on my left side, on near the
Mhm.
hip joint,
Right.
and I've got to insert it back into its case without looking,
Right. Right.
because if I look, I'm basically taken out by another person with the sword." And it was that was such an incredible thing. It's like it's not even about the sword.
Mhm.
It's about staying present.
Consciousness.
It's about just expanding awareness.
Yeah.
If I can't use it while I'm chopping potatoes,
Yeah.
then it wasn't worth learning.
So
That's
the guy who tried to trick the Zen master with his manipulating of the arrow so it would hit the target was confusing. Was thinking he was going to become a better archer when really the whole point of the exercise was developing a kind of a different state of awareness in him, and
mm,
the 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 arrow and the bow and the arrow and the target
yeah.
were just happened to be what the platform was for making this discovery.
Yeah, I mean,
But it wasn't like the Zen master was turning out master archers to be in the military or something like that. You know, it was kind of just missing the point of the whole thing.
yeah, I suppose one of the reasons I uh, continue pursuing jazz improvisation is to demystify my subconsciously held beliefs about what it means for Mastane to be a jazz improviser.
Uh huh.
You know,
Right.
are 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 there all these sort of ghosts in the closet about who did it better and who did it first?
Right. Right.
Or is
Right.
it about me learning about going out of balance?
Right. Right.
Because once a child around the age of, different for each child, uh, is getting to the point where they can kind of totter on their feet and learn how to take those first steps. If they're worried about being imbalanced, they just fall down again
They'll
and again
tense
and
up.
again.
They'll tense
They'll
up.
tense up. So I like to. I like to not go too far away from that and keep it practical because in a sense I did that. I
Hmm.
went through that experience. I don't remember it, but I did it because I had a need to communicate. And I love doing all these different things that I do uh, because of that. And sometimes it does get tough. It definitely, as a personal experience, I had a need to get it right and had a need to, you know, this and that and other judgment when I was in the training school. And but it was great learning, you know. I put myself in there because I had a need to learn how to um, find out.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm. So, is there anything that you want to add before we bring the conversation to a close?
um, yeah, I think I like to add the idea that we or we as an Alexander teaching community um, don't exactly have to stay to the letter,
The letter, yeah.
the letter, uh, because there's a lot of exploration that can happen. There's a lot of new ways to communicate intention
Hmm.
and help ourselves deal more effectively with the situation that Alexander never wrote about or never even experienced. So
Oh,
I really think,
absolutely.
so I really,
And Alexander, it was very clear many times, several times anyway, in his writing that uh, he was just starting something. It wasn't like, now this is the Alexander technique as I created it, and you really don't want to mess with it. In fact, he never used the word Alexander technique, and he said somewhere, one of his quotes is, "I hope someday that my work will be seen as a signpost to
hmm,
far greater things."
hmm,
And there are many instances in his writing where he makes it clear that he's just, in a sense, he kind of, I won't say he stumbled onto it, because it was a very conscious process on his part to learn how to deal with his voice issue. But in a way, he stumbled onto a process that he had no idea about before, and that
hmm,
he was able to expand out into a way of self learning how to improve yourself that could be taught to others and would be
hmm,
helpful in a wide variety of ways. But
hmm,
clearly, since his death, which is about 55, 60 years ago, there have been a lot of developments in Alexander teaching.
yeah,
And we're
absolutely.
seeing a lot of those right now. We're talking in 2013 in the area of Alexander technique directions. I mean, there are just
That's right.
fantastic developments in that.
Hmm, hmm,
So maybe on that note, we should bring our conversation to an end. What do you think?
absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
There'll be hours to talk about, but I think you picked it up.
Well, hey, that's my job, right? So
Yes.
my guest today has been Mastena Nazarian, an Alexander Technique teacher in Melbourne, Australia. If you live in that area, we'll put a link to her website. And if you're a student of the technique or want to become a student of the technique, uh, give her a call. We'll put a link to a site that has more information about the technique, and also we'll tell you how to locate a teacher anywhere in the world. So, Mastena, thank you so much for this.
Thank you, Robert.